He screamed like she'd keyed it. Just one fingertip on the chrome door handle of his new Audi. That was all it took for my brother Brian to explode. "Don't touch my damn car, kid. What are you, raised in a barn?" Ellie froze. My 9-year-old daughter, wearing her pink hoodie with the sparkly heart, hands still half hovering in the air. Everyone on the porch turned silent. Except my mother. She didn't comfort Ellie, didn't call out Brian. She sipped her lemonade and said, "She needs to learn boundaries. That's not how decent girls behave." The laugh that followed was soft. Dismissive. Familiar. The same laugh I'd heard when Brian shoved me off a swing at 7. When he read my diary at 13. When he got away with everything. But then she turned to me. Right there in front of the family. In front of Ellie. "Maybe if you raised her right, your husband wouldn't have left either." My hand clenched the side of the patio chair until it creaked. Ellie looked up at me confused, ashamed. I wanted to scream. Throw something. Shake them until they remembered she was just a child. But all I did was kneel beside Ellie and whisper, "We're leaving." And still, even then Brian smirked. "Running away again, huh, Laura?" Just like always. We got in the car. Ellie stared out the window, silent fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Then her voice barely audible, "Mom. Am I trash?" That word. That damn word my mother used like a fly swatter. Something broke inside me. Something that had bent for decades quietly under her polished smiles and passive cuts. But this was the last time my daughter would inherit my silence. Because what they didn't know was that I'd recorded everything. Their words, their laughter, their legacy. And this time, I wasn't going to protect their image. I was going to protect my daughter. Would you stay silent, or show the world who they really are? Where are you listening from? Has your family ever made you feel small? I told myself it would just be an hour. Drop by. Smile. Hand over the lemon cake I bought from Kroger. Avoid eye contact during dinner and get Ellie home in time for her bath. That was the deal I made with myself every year when Mom's birthday came around. And every year I found a reason not to go. But this year, Ellie had asked, "Why don't we ever see Grandma on our birthday?" She wasn't accusing, just curious. Still young enough to believe in birthday candles and unconditional love. Old enough to notice when something didn't add up. I couldn't tell her the truth. That some wounds don't fade with time. That some people never learn how to love without conditions. So I lied. "We've just been busy, sweetheart. But we can go this year." She beamed, not knowing what it cost me to say yes. She picked out her butterfly dress and asked if she could draw a card with flowers. Of course I said yes. I even helped her glue press daisies to the cover. I wore my black slacks and a soft blue blouse. Did my makeup the same way I would for a performance review. Professional. Neutral. Unreadable. The drive across town felt longer than it was. We passed the middle school. I went to the park where Brian broke his arm falling from the monkey bars, and the grocery store Mom used to send me into alone at age 7 while she waited in the car with the engine running. Ellie hummed quietly beside me, swinging her legs. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other clenched in my lap. Mom's house hadn't changed. Same white siding. Same polished walkway lined with ceramic garden animals. A sign by the door still read, "Bless this mess," even though there was never a mess allowed here. Inside, the smell of lemon cleaner and meatloaf hit me like a memory I didn't want. She opened the door wearing beige slacks and a sleeveless blouse, pearls at her throat. "Oh, you came," she said like it hadn't been her idea to invite us 3 weeks ago. Ellie held out the card with both hands. "Happy birthday, Grandma, I made this for you." Mom took it delicately, her nails perfectly manicured. "That's sweet. You used real flowers, daisies," Ellie said proudly. "Well, be careful with glue next time. It's a bit sticky." She set it aside without opening it. I looked down at Ellie, who had started fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Brian's voice boomed from the kitchen. Something about new rims and carbon fiber accents. His wife Alicia emerged carrying 2 glasses of Chardonnay, her linen dress wrinkle-free and spotless. Laura, she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. You look rested. I forced a smile. We've been doing okay? Ellie reached for one of the grapes on the cheese board and Alicia's hand gently stopped her. Not before dinner, sweetie. Gotta have manners right. Ellie blinked, cheeks flushing. Sorry. I bit my tongue. Dinner was exactly what I expected. Roast beef. Scalloped potatoes. Brian talking over everyone, describing the leather stitching on his new Audi like it was art. Alicia nodding on cue, Mom refilling his glass like he was royalty. It even has a massage feature, Brian said. Not that you'd need that, Laura, since you sit at a desk all day. Mom chuckled. Well, she always liked office work. Nothing wrong with keeping it simple. Ellie looked up from her peas. Mom's the boss of her office. Brian raised a brow. They made you a manager, for real. Yes, I said, voice even. Field operations and scheduling. Well, Alicia chimed in, that's wonderful. So empowering. She said it like a compliment. It didn't land like one. After dinner, Ellie cleared her plate without being asked. Can I see Uncle Brian's car now? She whispered. I hesitated. Then nodded. Just stay where I can see you, okay? She skipped off toward the front door. I stayed behind to help clear the table. Carried dishes into the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, wiped the counters. Tried to drown out Brian's voice from the living room where he was now explaining crypto to my father. Alicia leaned against the fridge with her wine. I heard John got remarried. A yoga instructor, right? I looked at her. Yes. She's nice, I think. They moved to Lake of the Ozarks. Wow, she said. That must be weird. I nodded, trying not to flinch. You're really doing it all on your own, huh? She didn't say it cruelly. But pity always lands sharp when you're trying to hold yourself together. I rinsed a plate harder than I needed to. We're okay. I've got good people around me. A lie. Mostly. Out front I heard the first sharp words. Brian's voice, angry and loud. I dropped the sponge and rushed outside, heart pounding. But by the time I stepped onto the porch, it had already happened. Brian standing tall, red in the face, pointing at Ellie. Ellie frozen, small, confused. Don't touch my car, what the hell were you thinking? My mother stepped onto the porch behind me, folding her arms. She needs to learn respect. You can't just raise a wild child and expect people to cater to her. I stepped between them. Wrapped an arm around Ellie. Her small hands clutched the side of my shirt. We're going, I said. Don't be dramatic, Mom snapped. She just needs some discipline. You never could take criticism. I didn't answer. I opened the car door, buckled Ellie in. Saturday behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. Am I bad? She asked. Grandma said I act like trash. That word again. Used like a blade, passed from generation to generation. No, baby. You are kind. You are thoughtful. You are everything good. But my voice broke on the last word. I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror. The porch lights still glowing, Brian's silhouette tall behind the window. I drove in silence. Ellie slept before we reached our exit. And that's when I remembered I had left my phone recording in my purse. The whole dinner, the card, the comments, the confrontation. I reached down, heart racing, and checked. Still recording. Still on. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't going to end the way it always had. Not this time. Ellie didn't ask to see them again. Not once. Not the next morning when we made waffles. Not when we drove past the shopping center near their house. Not even when I reminded her that Grandma's birthday card was still in her backpack. She just nodded and said, okay. Then quietly went back to coloring. But the butterflies on the page didn't have faces. And she kept picking up crayons, then putting them back without using them. I noticed. She still laughed at cartoons. Still asked for extra syrup. Still gave me hugs so tight they felt like she was holding herself together. But something had gone quiet in her. And something loud had started in me. That Monday I went back to work. Office felt the same. Printer humming. Phone ringing. The scent of burnt coffee someone forgot to throw out. I sat at my desk half listening to a budget call, nodding at the right moments. But my mind was with Ellie, how she winced when someone raised their voice, even on television. How she suddenly asked if we had enough money. What if Grandma doesn't help anymore, she'd whispered that night. I wanted to say we'd be fine, but my stomach clenched because sometimes we weren't. When rent and groceries and after-school care hit the same week, I'd swallow my pride and text Mom. And the money would come. With silence. Or worse advice. Maybe try cutting out Starbucks. Brian's wife manages just fine. Maybe if you hadn't rushed into marriage. But now I couldn't imagine asking her for anything. Not after she called my daughter trash. Tuesday night, after Ellie went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch. My phone buzzed on the end table. 4 messages from Mom unread. The preview showed the first line: "We need to talk about Sunday. I think you misunderstood." I muted the thread, then I remembered the recording. I'd tucked my phone in my purse before dinner and forgot all about it. Until Brian's yelling had jolted everything into focus. I unlocked the phone, opened voice memos. 2 hours and 28 minutes. Still there. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the play button. Then I tapped. It started innocently. Chatter. Forks clinking. Brian bragging. Then the shift. Alicia's careful tone. "So, still on your own." My laugh. Flat. Guarded. Mom's voice. "You always liked things simple, didn't you? Glue everywhere." She really should learn restraint. She's lucky Brian didn't snap harder. Each line hit harder than the last. Then Ellie's voice. "Small. I made it with daisies." I paused the recording. Tears blurred my vision. Not just because they'd humiliated my child, but because I'd heard this tape before. Not with earbuds, but in my own head my whole life. Different lines. Same message. "Don't talk so loud. You're too sensitive." Brian didn't mean it. I needed air. I stepped out onto the small balcony that overlooked the parking lot. Our apartment complex was quiet this time of night. Just the hum of AC units and the faint flicker of a television behind someone's curtain. I leaned against the railing. The metal was cool against my palms. Then I heard the sliding door behind me open. "You okay?" It was Naomi from 4B. She was holding a basket of laundry, but she didn't move. "Yeah," I lied. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. "Want to talk about it? Or do you need wine and silence?" I gave her a weak smile. "Both." We sat at my kitchen table. Her basket on the floor. My half-glass refilled. I told her the bare bones. Family dinner. Brian's car. Mom's comment. Ellie's face. She didn't interrupt, just listened. "I recorded it," I admitted. Her eyebrows rose. "All of it?" I nodded. "Did they know number?" I forgot I hit record. She leaned back, exhaled slowly. "And now what?" That was the question, wasn't it? I'd grown up thinking survival meant silence. That keeping peace was more important than being seen. But watching Ellie fold in on herself like I once did, that rewrote something in me. "I don't know," I said finally. "I just know I can't let them make her feel worthless." Naomi nodded. "You don't have to know yet. But maybe. It's time to stop protecting people who keep hurting you." The next day, Ellie didn't want to go to music club. Which was strange. She loved singing. "Why not?" I asked gently. She shrugged. "It's loud there." Her voice was soft. Almost guilty. I crouched beside her. "You don't have to go today. But you're allowed to be loud, Ellie. Especially when you're happy." She looked up at me. Eyes unsure. And in that moment I realized she didn't believe it. That night I replayed the recording again. This time I skipped ahead. Right to the part where Mom said, "If you knew how to raise her, your husband wouldn't have left." Then the sound of Ellie's gasp. My own silence. I'd frozen. Just like I always had. But now I hit pause. And whispered, "Not anymore." I waited 2 days before calling her. Part of me hoped she'd call first. Say she was sorry. Say she'd gone too far. But silence stretched thick and familiar. So I gave in. Mom picked up on the second ring. "Laura," she said, brisk as always. "I've been meaning to call." I sat at the kitchen table, the cord from my laptop charger coiled like a noose near my elbow. "Then why didn't you?" I asked quietly. She sighed. "Because I figured you needed time to cool down. You were emotional." There it was, that word. Always used like a scolding. As if emotion was a stain I kept getting on the furniture. "You called my daughter trash," I said. To her face. In front of people. "I did not. I said she was acting wild. There's a difference." "She heard you." "I heard you." Pause. "Then Laura, you've always taken things too personally. You twist everything into an attack." I stared at the countertop. A small syrup stain from breakfast shimmered in the light. Ellie had laughed when the bottle made that farting noise. That laugh was still echoing in my ears. "You've done this my whole life," I said. "You make excuses for Brian, and when I get upset, I'm the problem." Her voice changed. Cooler, sharper. "Brian works hard. He has responsibilities. It's not easy providing for a family. He doesn't have kids. He provides for us," she snapped. "He gave me that car. He helped redo the kitchen. What have you done, Laura, besides burden us with your bad decisions?" Something cracked. Not loud. Not even visible. Just a soft internal shift, like the sound of snow giving way underfoot. "So, Ellie and I are a burden." "Don't twist my words. You always do that." I sat in silence. She filled it as she always did. "You've always had a flair for drama. It's why your marriage fell apart. And now you're raising a girl who frankly isn't learning any better." I felt sick. I looked at the fridge door where Ellie's newest drawing was pinned, a sun with arms, a stick figure singing. And underneath it in shaky handwriting, "I love how loud I am." I hung up. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't need to. I sat for a long time. Hands trembling slightly, but heart strangely steady. It wasn't just the birthday dinner. It wasn't just Sunday. It was a lifetime. I thought about the time in 3rd grade when I came home crying because I didn't make the spelling bee. Brian had shoved my folder off the table and laughed. Mom looked over her magazine and said, "Don't be so dramatic, Laura. You're not dying." I thought about senior year when I got into a local college on partial scholarship. Brian didn't even apply anywhere. He took a gap year to find himself. She threw him a dinner party. I got a grocery store sheet cake. I thought about Ellie, her eyes wide and confused. Am I bad? Am I trash number? Not now. Not ever again. That night I pulled out my laptop, plugged in my external drive, opened the voice memo file. I listened again. This time without flinching. Mom's laughter, Brian's condescension, Alicia's soft giggle, and underneath it all Ellie's soft voice. The shame in it, the shrinking. I selected the file. Click duplicate, then again, and again, 3 backups. Labeled with the date. Saved in separate folders. Then I emailed it to myself. Then to Naomi. Subject line, "In case I do something bold." She replied 4 minutes later. "You should. They deserve it. And Ellie deserves better." I didn't reply. But I smiled. The next day, Mom sent another message. A paragraph this time. "Family fights happen. But good daughters don't weaponize them. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Brian feels terrible. He said he barely touched her. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just more performance." I didn't respond. 2 hours later, Brian texted, "Hey, don't drag this into something it's not. You overreacted. But I'm willing to let it go if you are." If. That word held centuries of entitlement. That weekend, I took Ellie to the Arboretum. We walked under blooming dogwoods. She held my hand the whole time. She didn't sing. Until we saw a patch of bluebells. She looked up at me. "Can I?" she whispered. "Always," I said. She's saying you are my sunshine. Softly, gently. It broke me a little, but it also rebuilt something. That night I opened a new email draft. Typed in one address. lisa.davison@harrislegal.com. Subject confidential. Family matter. The reply came the next morning. Hi Laura, let's talk. Discretion guaranteed. Lisa Davison and I weren't close. We'd gone to the same community college, taken a few night classes together back when I was still married and still trying to believe in balance. She had gone on to law school. I had gone on to daycare drop-offs, Excel spreadsheets, and frozen pizza dinners. But I remembered one thing about Lisa: she didn't mince words, and she didn't scare easily. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the south side of town, the kind where no one asked questions if you stayed too long and only ordered tea. She looked older, sharper. Her blazer was immaculate, but her eyes were kind. I handed her the flash drive without saying much. Is it what I think it is? She asked. 2 hours of gaslighting, I said. And one moment that changed everything. She plugged in her laptop and listened through noise-canceling earbuds while I sat there stirring my tea long after the sugar had dissolved. Every few minutes I watched her eyebrows twitch, then she'd pause. Take notes. Keep going. When she finished, she took the earbuds out, folded her hands, and looked at me. This is bad. But it's also clear. You've got emotional harm, verbal abuse, and a clear lack of remorse from multiple parties. You're not crazy. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that last line, but she added, legally you're in a gray space. What they said is awful, but unless you're pursuing a custody issue or suing for damages, your best leverage is social, not legal. I nodded. I'd expected that. Then let's talk about the social kind, I said. Because I'm done staying quiet. That night after Ellie fell asleep hugging her stuffed owl, I sat at my laptop. I opened the files. Rewatched the moment Brian's voice rose. The exact second my mother said the word trash. I clipped just that part. Under 2 minutes. Raw. Undeniable. I didn't post it. Not yet. But I uploaded it to a private drive. Password protected. And I made a list: 3 names. Ellie's school principal. Our church's children's director. The regional coordinator for Brian's dealership. I didn't send anything. Not yet. But I was ready. 2 days later, Ellie came home with a note from her teacher. Ellie's withdrawn during group activities. We're keeping an eye, but wanted to check in. I called Miss Robbins that night. She's still sweet, the teacher said. But she's quieter. More careful. Like she's watching the room before she moves. I thanked her. Hung up. Saturday in the dark. Somewhere along the way, I'd accepted this pain as mine. But now watching it root itself in Ellie, I couldn't accept it anymore. That Friday, I was in the break room at work microwaving leftovers when my coworker Mara asked casually, "Hey, isn't your brother the guy with the Audi R8? My street-o-mock flipped. Why? He was in that Chamber of Commerce video. But they pulled it. Heard someone made a complaint. I said nothing, but I felt it like a wind shift. Subtle. Inevitable. That night I found Ellie in the living room with her sketchpad. She was drawing again. A girl with a cape. She labeled it loud, hero. Is that you? I asked. No, she said. It's someone who's not afraid anymore. I kissed her forehead. She looks familiar. Later, I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, looking at the draft message to the dealership. No anger, no threats. Just the audio clip. A note: this is how he speaks to a child. Thought you should know. I hovered over send. The dealership called me. Blocked number. Voicemail only. A clipped voice, male, formal. Miss Green, this is about a concern you submitted regarding one of our employees. We'd like to confirm receipt and request a meeting if you're available. Please return the call at your earliest convenience. They didn't say his name. They didn't have to. I saved the voicemail and sat at my kitchen table, heart pounding like I'd been caught stealing. Even though I had done nothing wrong. That's what abuse does, it rewires you. Even when you know the truth, you still brace for punishment. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was her. My mother. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded the second I answered. "Brian's job is being threatened." "Someone sent that audio." I didn't say a word. "You recorded us," she hissed. "Like some kind of spy. After everything we've done for you," I could hear clinking in the background. Her wine glass. Probably her rings against the counter. "You're tearing this family apart. Ellie will suffer most." "Is that what you want?" That line nearly broke me. I hung up. No answer, no explanation, just silence. This time it was mine to give. That week I got 3 more messages. One from Alicia, thinly veiled concern. "I know things got intense, but surely there's a better way to handle this. For Ellie's sake." One from Brian. "You're playing with fire, Laura. Don't forget who helped you out after the divorce." And one from a number I didn't recognize. "You're disgusting." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I walked Ellie to school every morning, packed her snack with handwritten notes, picked her up early on Thursdays for library day. One afternoon, her teacher stopped me at the door. "Just wanted you to know," Miss Robbins said gently, "Ellie's been more herself this week. She sang a little in class today." It took everything in me not to cry right there in the hallway. At night, after Ellie was asleep, I kept sorting files, backing things up, taking notes, making a list. Lisa had helped me word a statement. Not for court, not for headlines, but in case I ever needed to explain clearly and calmly why I'd done what I'd done. She'd written the last sentence herself. Sometimes silence protects the wrong people. I copied it down into my journal, then underlined it twice. Friday evening, Naomi knocked on my door with 2 paper bags. "Wine and garlic knots," she said. "You're due for both." We sat on the floor and played cards like we used to before everything turned cold. Halfway through, she said, "I think what you're doing is brave." I shook my head. "It doesn't feel brave. It feels like I'm peeling off my own skin." She sipped her wine. "Still, most people never get past the flinch." I didn't answer. But I slept better that night. Saturday morning, Ellie found a letter in our mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Just her name written in messy cursive. Inside was a folded sheet of printer paper. No greeting, no sign-off. Just one sentence. "You don't destroy your family over a tantrum." Ellie held it out to me with wide eyes. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" I took the note and ripped it in half. "No, baby, someone else did." Then I closed the blinds and started thinking about legacy. That night we painted together in the kitchen. Watercolors, paper towels. A mason jar of cloudy rinse water. Ellie painted flowers. I painted lines and colors that didn't mean anything but felt like something leaving my body. At one point she looked up and asked, "Why don't they like us?" The question landed in my chest like a stone dropped into a still lake. I put down my brush. Some people don't like what they can't control. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means they're afraid of how bright you are. Her lip trembled. "I don't feel bright." "That's okay," I whispered. "I'll hold the light until you remember how." On Sunday, I drove by my parents' house, just drove past. Didn't stop, didn't slow down. But I needed to see it to remind myself it wasn't some haunted mansion or fortress. Just siding and windows. A porch light. A cracked driveway. I thought I'd feel fear. But all I felt was distance. That evening, I opened my laptop. Drafted 3 messages. Simple, direct, unapologetic. One to the dealership board. One to the local PTA where Brian sat as a business sponsor. One to a podcast I followed that told stories about accountability and family healing. I didn't send them, but I saved them in a folder called "If They Push Again." I'm not trying to ruin anyone's life. I'm trying to rebuild mine. For Ellie. For every time I was told to be quiet, to smile, to sit smaller, to not make waves. They told me silence was strength. But I've learned silence was the leash. And I'm not leashed anymore. Have you ever stood up quietly but firmly? If this story feels like yours, tell me, when did you decide enough was enough? You're not alone. And this story isn't over yet. The first real shift came from someone I didn't expect. Miss Robbins pulled me aside after school pickup. She held a small folder in her hands, her expression serious but warm. I wanted to let you know I documented the emotional changes we've seen in Ellie since the incident you mentioned. Not as a report, just in case you need a record. She placed the folder in my hands like something sacred. Some of us see more than we're allowed to say, she added quietly. But we still want to help. I nodded, throat tight. This time I didn't fight the tears. I let them come. That night, after Ellie fell asleep with her head on my arm, I opened the folder. Inside were notes. Neutral on the surface, but heartbreaking if you knew what to look for. Student appears hesitant to speak in group settings, shows increased caution when addressed by male teachers. Declined solo role in class presentation despite prior enthusiasm. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a bruise that lived deeper than skin. The next morning I called Lisa. I'm ready, I said. Whatever next looks like, I want to do it. She was silent for a beat, then replied. Okay. Then we do this smart, documented, measured, and unshakable. Step 1 was Ellie. I scheduled a session with a child therapist, one Lisa recommended. Dr. Myers was calm, soft-spoken, with gentle eyes and a messy desk that instantly put Ellie at ease. I sat outside the room for 45 minutes, fingers tapping the same rhythm on my coffee cup. After the session, Dr. Myers walked me to the waiting area. She's guarded but incredibly perceptive, she said. There's some clear anxiety tied to authority, especially male voices. But she's not broken. She's trying to make sense of something that doesn't. She handed me a short letter, her clinical summary. Just enough to add weight. To put structure beneath the things I already knew were true. Step 2: narrative control. Lisa helped me draft a personal statement. Not to go public yet, but to prepare for what would come if I did. They'll call you bitter. They'll say you're overreacting. They'll use motherhood against you, she said. So you stay calm and clear. I wrote at night after Ellie was asleep. Just a few paragraphs at first. Then a full letter. I included only what mattered. The recording, the impact, the silence, and the cost. Step 3: decide where the truth should land. I didn't want viral. I wanted accountability. So I contacted 3 places: a community advocacy group for parental rights, a nonprofit that trained professionals on trauma-informed environments, an HR officer from Brian's dealership, one Lisa had quietly vetted. Each message was measured. Factual. No venom, no threats. Just truth. And documentation. Days passed. One reply came quickly from the advocacy group. They asked if I'd consider sharing my story anonymously for training materials. There are more parents like you than you realize, the woman wrote. Your voice could help others name what they've been gaslighted into believing was just family stuff. That phrase hit like a thunderclap. Meanwhile, the dealership stayed quiet. Until Friday morning. I was heating Ellie's oatmeal when my phone buzzed. We'd like to schedule a conversation regarding Mr. Brian Green's conduct and your submitted material. Are you available for a virtual meeting next week? I replied yes. Then sat down at the table with Ellie and passed her the blueberries. Mom, why are you smiling at oatmeal? She asked. Just grateful, I said. For small things that matter. That weekend, Tara came by, my old friend from church days, now a nurse, divorced fierce. She brought donuts and zero patience for my hesitation. If I had a file like that when my ex shoved our kid over homework, I would have burned the world down, she said. We sat on my balcony while Ellie painted at the kitchen table. I told Tara everything. When I finished, she looked at me long and hard. You've already changed the ending, she said. You just haven't seen it play out yet. The following Tuesday, I logged into the meeting with the dealership. Lisa sat beside me, off-camera muted. The HR rep was polite, polished, and clearly uncomfortable. He asked me to confirm the details. I did. He asked if I wanted compensation. I said I wanted policy change. He didn't expect that. I told him Brian wasn't just a rude brother, he was a man representing a family brand who mocked a child in public and then laughed when she cried. He said he'd be following up. Lisa raised an eyebrow when we logged off. You didn't blink, she said. I'm tired of blinking, I replied. That night Ellie asked if she could practice her song again. She hadn't sung in days. Only if you want to, I told her. No one's expecting anything. She nodded. Then stood near the bookshelf and began humming softly. It wasn't perfect, it cracked on the high notes. But it was hers again. And I sat on the couch, hands in my lap, letting the tears come. Quiet. Clean. The next day, I received an anonymous email from someone at the dealership. It's not the first complaint about him. Thank you for speaking up. Some of us were just waiting for someone to go first. I never wanted to go first. But maybe I had to. Because Ellie would grow up watching me. Watching what I did when someone crossed the line. Watching how I stood or didn't. Watching if I let fear win. I won't be perfect. But I will be loud enough to teach her that strength isn't silence. It started quietly. Just a forwarded email. No subject line, no body. Only the clip. 1 minute and 43 seconds. Brian's voice sharp and elevated. My mother's words, she's acting like trash. And my own silence, followed by Ellie's small gasp. Somebody had shared it. I hadn't. Not directly, but someone I trusted must have passed it to someone else. And just like that, the lie began to unravel. By Friday afternoon, the clip had surfaced in 2 private parenting groups. Then on a subreddit for toxic family systems. Then on a local moms forum in Wichita. No names. No context. But the audio spoke for itself. The comments poured in. That voice. You can hear how afraid the little girl is. I was called trash too. I still flinch at the word. You don't discipline a child like that, you break them. By Saturday morning it had been viewed over 12,000 times. I didn't panic. I didn't post a thing. I watched. And I waited. Brian called 6 times. Then texted. You've made your point. Take it down before this goes nuclear. You want to destroy my life over a kid's tantrum. Ellie should be grateful. I was teaching her respect. I read each one with a calm I didn't recognize. Then blocked his number. Mom, on the other hand, tried a different approach. She showed up, Sunday afternoon, right on our doorstep. Lips tight, scarf knotted like armor, perfume too strong as always. I didn't let her in. Laura, this is getting out of hand. People are calling the house. Your Aunt Ruth sent me the link. Do you know how humiliating this is? Do you know how humiliating it was for Ellie? I asked. She's a child. She'll forget. I didn't forget, I said. I was a child once too. She flinched at that. Something cracked in her expression, then hardened again. You've always been dramatic. You're letting resentment poison your daughter. I closed the door, and this time I didn't cry. That night I got a message from someone unexpected. Natalie. Brian's wife. It was a voice note. Her tone was low, unsure. I heard the recording. I recognized the voices. I want you to know. I believe you. And I'm sorry. Pause. Then I think it's time I leave him. My heart pounded. Ellie deserves better. So do you. So do I. Monday morning, HR from the dealership followed up. Brian had been placed on administrative leave, pending further review of conduct unbecoming as outlined in our ethical code. They cited child welfare concerns and negative public association. I didn't smile. Not yet, but something in my chest loosened. Then came the message from Ellie's school principal. We've reviewed the situation with Ellie's teacher and counselor. Your proactive involvement and documentation are exemplary. We're instituting new emotional support policies for students facing family trauma. Thank you for speaking up. I stared at the screen, hands trembling. We were being believed. Not pitied. Not patronized. Believed. That afternoon, I picked Ellie up early. We went for ice cream chocolate chip with marshmallow swirl. She licked the cone and asked, "Am I still allowed to sing at school?" "You're allowed to sing anywhere you want," I said. "Even loud, especially loud." She grinned. Gap-toothed. Glorious. That evening, I received an email from one of Brian's old clients. We'd met at a fundraiser years ago. Saw the clip. "I recognized your mother's voice. We all knew something was off, but nobody said anything. I just want to say thank you for naming it." They ended the message with, "It's time people stop confusing money with morals." Later that week, Aunt Catherine called. She was Mom's older sister. The quiet one. Always watching, rarely speaking. "I saw it too," she said. "I waited. And I remember. I remember how they treated you. And how they let Brian run wild and called it charm." "Why didn't anyone ever stop it?" I asked. She sighed. "Because we were raised to think keeping peace was the same as doing good. But I'm starting to think peace built on fear isn't peace at all." Saturday, Ellie and I were invited to speak anonymously at a virtual panel for parent advocates. We watched from the living room. She wore her purple headphones and sat beside me, legs tucked under. When it ended, she turned to me. "They listened to us," she whispered. "Even though they didn't know our names, that's the power of truth," I said. "It doesn't need a label. Just a voice." On Sunday, I opened the piano bench and found my old college folder filled with half-written essays, dream journals, and one yellow sticky note. Ellie's handwriting. Recently added. "Mom, you're louder than anyone I know. And that's a good thing." I folded it. Tucked it in my wallet, a new kind of legacy. Then came the invitation. A school assembly. The counselor wanted Ellie to be part of a children's choir, small, local, simple. No pressure, Ellie agreed. But only if she could sing solo on the last line. The night of the performance, I sat in the third row of the community center, heart racing. When her name was called, Ellie stepped up to the microphone. Hair pinned back. Dress navy blue. Hands slightly shaking. Eyes forward. The music started. She sang. Soft at first. Then stronger. "This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine." And then the last line. She looked straight ahead, voice clear. "Won't let anyone blow it out. Not ever again." The room erupted. Not wild applause, just that full, warm kind of sound that fills your chest. I stood, tears on my cheeks. Not from pain. Not this time. From pride, from peace, from justice. It's been 5 months since that dinner. 5 months since my daughter's voice was silenced, then found again, and everything feels different now. Not easier, not perfect, just honest. The silence that used to hum beneath every family interaction. Gone. We haven't seen Brian. He's still employed, but in a lesser role, desk work, no client-facing duties. Natalie filed for separation last month. I sent her a short message. "Whatever choice you make, I believe you." She wrote back. "For the first time in years, I'm learning to believe myself too." My mother hasn't spoken to us, not directly. But Ellie received a box in the mail 2 weeks ago. No note. Just an old music box, one I used to wind before bed as a child. Ellie opened it, watched the ballerina spin in silence, then quietly closed the lid. "She could have said sorry," she whispered. But maybe this is all she knows how to say. I didn't try to translate the gesture. It wasn't our job anymore to make other people's love easier to carry. We still go to therapy. Together sometimes and separately. Dr. Myers says Ellie's made significant progress. She's singing in public. Laughing louder. One night when we were walking home from the library, she grabbed my hand and said, "When I grow up, I want to be loud like you." I stopped right there on the sidewalk, under the glow of a broken street lamp, and held her face in both hands. "Baby, I was never loud. I just learned how not to shrink." She smiled. Same thing. The holidays came and went. No invites from the family, no drama either. Instead, we spent Thanksgiving with Naomi and her brother's kids' pizza board games and mismatched chairs around a folding table. It was messy and perfect. On Christmas morning, Ellie sang to me in her pajamas off-key, one sock missing. Then we made pancakes and watched cartoons until noon. It was the most peaceful December I've ever lived through. Work has changed too. Grace, my supervisor, called me in for a meeting in January. I braced myself for a reprimand. Instead, she handed me a new title: Project Operations Manager. With a raise. You've led people through crisis. Calmly. Logically. With empathy, she said. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. For the first time in my life, I walked out of that office knowing I wasn't there just to survive. I belonged. The clip still circulates, quietly, respectfully. People reach out sometimes, other mothers, teachers, even strangers. They tell me they've been called dramatic, that they've swallowed comments like "you're too sensitive" until they forgot what being heard even felt like. I answer each message. Not with advice, but with something simple. You are not alone. You are not overreacting. And you are not the problem. Last week I spoke at a local community panel topic, breaking the cycle. I wore navy. No notes. Just my story. Halfway through, I looked out and saw Ellie in the third row holding Naomi's hand. When it ended, she ran to me backstage. You didn't even shake, she said. You sounded like you were flying. Maybe I was. One Sunday morning, Ellie asked me something unexpected. Will we ever go back to Grandma's house? I hesitated. Do you want to? She shook her head immediately. I just wondered. If they change someday, do we have to forgive them? I knelt beside her. Forgiveness is a choice. But it's not an obligation. You don't owe it to anyone who hasn't shown you respect. But I can still hope they change. You can hope, I said. But you don't have to wait. She nodded like she understood more than I expected. Because she did. The other night, I found her sitting on the balcony with her sketch pad. I asked what she was drawing. A girl, she said. She's walking away from a house that looks pretty, but the door is locked from the inside. I asked where the girl was going. She smiled. Someplace where her voice doesn't echo. It just gets heard. I stood behind her, arms around her shoulders. The sky was dark above us. But our home was lit, warm, alive with color and noise. We weren't surviving anymore. We were building something new. If this story felt familiar, maybe it's time you chose peace over performance. Maybe quiet justice is enough. Or maybe, like me, you needed to say, it ends with me. Have you ever had to break away from your family's silence? Share your story in the comments. What gave you the courage to stand? You are not alone. Your voice matters. Your legacy begins now. Subscribe to Ian Reddit Story for more real stories of justice, healing, and quiet empowerment after 40.